welcome you to 2022 Spring Immigration Workshop. We're really excited to have you here. This is our Get By with a Little Help from Your Friends session, how to work with NAFSA colleagues on complex questions in student and scholar advising. My name is Caitlin Simkowitz. I'm going to be our Zoom coordinator, but I'm going to be turning it over to our wonderful presenters in just a minute. We'll go to the next slide. Just a little bit of Zoom etiquette. Make sure, we would love to have you change your name. I have not done so. I'm delinquent in my own advice, but changing your name to having your institution as well as your name. And if you want to share your pronouns as well, that's great. Turn on your video if you feel comfortable. We know that everyone is Zoom weary after 2 years of pandemic life. So we certainly understand it if you need to have some self-care and take some time off video, but we'd love to have video. It certainly enhances the conversation, particularly for our presenters. Connect with all of your colleagues in the chat. We really want to see robust conversations through the chat. And since we can't be in person, that's the best that we've got right now. And then ask questions away. We would love to have as many questions go through all of these sessions and to be resources to you as we go through this immigration workshop. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our presenters. Just one last note that our session will be recorded today. So we're going to get that recording started. Hannah's going to get that recording started now. And I will turn it over to our presenters. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Caitlin. Welcome to everyone who is here. We are so glad to have you today for this session. Get by with a little help from your friends, how to work with NAFSA colleagues on complex questions in student and scholar advising. This is a session that kind of came out of some conversations among the Grack team, and we hope that you'll find it helpful. The agenda for today is talking about identifying an issue in international student and scholar advising and how to start the research, looking at more specific areas of research using NAFSA Region 11 resources and the Grack team. And then we're also going to talk a little bit about the role of SEVP field reps towards the end. And before we start, I just wanted to check, are there any government officials with us today or any of the field reps that might be here? If you could just say hi in the chat, that would be great. Doesn't seem like anybody so far. Okay, and before we get started, I think we're going to take a poll here. This is one of my first times using Zoom poll after 2 years of this pandemic, if you can believe it, so bear with me. This is a session that kind of was, we considered this session mostly for people who are in the early stages of their career in international student and scholar advising, but we hope that we are joined by people who have a variety of backgrounds, of course. And the first question is, how long have you been in the field of international student and scholar advising? So if you could answer on the poll, that would be great. Seems like just about everyone has answered so far. So wow, it seems like we have a lot of people who have been doing this for a lot longer. We have some people who, about 50% of the people who are here have been doing this for over 5 years. And then the remaining 50% is kind of divvied up equally among grad students, people with 1 to 3 years of experience, and then some people with 3 to 5 years of experience. So for those of you who are more experienced, we would love to have your insights. And if you could share them in the chat, or if there are things that you have worked out, problems or issues that you have worked out, or if there are resources that you have found helpful that we are not mentioning today, we would love for you to share that insight. I think that would just be great. So thank you all again for being here. And then the next question in our, that I wanted to ask everyone is, how many staff are in your office? You could be a 1-person office, 2 to 5 people in your office, 5 to 10, or 10 plus. We're just trying to get a sense of, how readily information can be shared among team members with this question. It seems like most people who are here today are in smaller offices, about 2 to 5 people. That's over 60% of people. Wow. So over 2/3 of the participants today are in an office of about 2 to 5 people. About 20% are in a 1-person office, and then the remainder are in a 5 to 10 or a 10+ office. Okay. That's really good to know. And then our last question, and this might dictate the amount of time that we spend on one section of this presentation, is do you have a subscription or access to the NAFSA manual? Okay, that's great. So it seems like about over 70% of people, close to 3/4 of people have access to the NAFSA manual. And then about the remaining percentage, the remaining 25% or so don't have it, but are working on it. So we will spend a little bit of time then on the NAFSA manual and how to use it and its significance. Okay, thank you all so much for your participation in those polls. So the first step in considering an issue when advising an international student and scholar and kind of working through a complicated problem, the first thing I always think about is what status is the student or scholar in? I always think of that as being the real starting point of any kind of analysis. Are they an F1 student? Are they a J1 student? Are they a J2 dependent? The issues can vary considerably depending on the person's individual status and what that status may allow for pursuant to the regulations and any campus policies that you may have. So that's always where I start my own analysis. And then, especially when I'm explaining my job to other people who might not be in the field, one thing that I usually explain is that, the most frequent questions that we get from international students and scholars involves whether or not they can work or travel. So I usually kind of think about those issues next. Is this a work issue? Is it an employment issue? Is the issue about whether they can return to the United States? If they're an international student, is this an enrollment issue? Some of us were just kind of talking about some of those issues that might be coming up for some of our students from Ukraine and Russia right now. And these are just kind of some examples of some of the potential specific issues that might come up. If it's employment, is it on or off campus? If it's a J1 scholar, are they seeking to do something at a second site of activity? Is it travel inside the US or outside the US? And is the person's documentation valid? Do they have their valid passport? Do they have a valid visa? Do they have a required travel signature? When it comes to enrollment, obviously, these are more student-oriented questions than scholar questions. Is it part-time or full-time? Is there academic discipline that's being contemplated by the powers that be at the student's school? Is there an issue with improper course placement or English language? Is there a medical problem that the student might be experiencing, or is there a health issue that they might be struggling with right now? Those are the types of kind of issues that sort of dictate where your analysis is going to go next. But these are some of the starting points and considerations that you might want to think about. Sometimes if I'm really struggling with something, I might sit down and write out key facts, just kind of bullet point them on a scrap piece of paper. Sometimes for myself, that really helps me organize my thoughts and helps me figure out where I need to go next. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Anna to talk about what some of these next steps are. And I just realized, you'll have to excuse me, I neglected to introduce us at the outset of this session. We're all so eager to get going. Perhaps it was my anxiety over Zoom use that is persisting at this stage of the pandemic. My name is Elizabeth Capuano. I am an advisor to international students and scholars at the Harvard International Office. And today I am very pleased to be joined by my colleagues, Hanna Bliss at the Office of Immigration Services at Amherst College, and Anna Garson at the Center for International Students and Scholars at Bentley University. We are so thrilled to have them today, and we greatly appreciate their time. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Anna to talk about how to get research really started.
Thank you, Elizabeth. So we're going to get started today with, after you've identified the issue, with a little bit about the NAFSA manual. Just wait to get that, our PowerPoint back up.
Sorry about that. The screen just
No
froze on me.
So it looks like from the polls that most of you have access or are using the NAFSA manual, but there is a small percentage of you who do not have access or who are working on it. So I'm just going to go over a little bit about what the NAFSA manual can offer you and your office. So let's get set up.
There we go.
There we go. So once you've identified an issue, the NAFSA's Advisor's Manual is your bread and butter. This is where you want to start your research to any issue that you may have. So again, so great to see that so many of you already have access to the NAFSA manual or are using it. If you don't, this is the time to be advocating for your office, to your campus partner stakeholders for this manual as a critical resource for compliance, amongst other things. So it's a relatively low cost annually for NAFSA manual. For NAFSA members, it's only a little bit over $300 per year. And then for non-members, I believe it's a little over $400. And I guarantee you that what you're going to gain from the manual is going to be far more than that. So we can move forward to the next slide. So the Advisor's Manual is a hub of information. It's going to zoom out and give you the context surrounding an issue in international student scholar advising, all the way down, zooming into the very nitty-gritty procedural aspects, what documents to collect to issue an I-20, how to do an OPT recommendation in SEVP. So again, you're going to have the entire regulatory context and then also procedures and practice notes. So if we go to the next slide, I'm just going to go over some of the ways that you can use the manual. So luckily, it's very user-friendly. As of recently, the main way that I use the manual is through the drop-down table of contents that you'll see on the left-hand side. You can also use the search function just like any other search engine. It's not visible on this screen, but you can use it like any other search function. And then if you look at the right-hand side of your screen, there's some other ways that you can navigate the manual. So you can search by practice notes. So practice notes are going to be the applications of the regulation, really useful for covering some of those gray areas that may not be addressed in the regulation. So putting the regulation into practice. I love being able to go directly to the citation. So always recommend when you're looking into an issue to go to the regulation themselves. And here you can search by a specific subject and it'll link you to the exact area in the Code of Federal Regulations where you can find that information. And some other ways that you can customize the NAFSA manual to fit your needs. There's user notes that you can use. So this is really useful internally for your office. If you want to share something in the manual with someone and add a comment for them, or maybe you'll put a note there saying this is what we reference in order to come up with this specific policy. And then other things you can do with the manual, you can customize your dashboard. I actually learned a lot in going back to there's a user's manual for the NAFSA manual, which I actually hadn't looked at in a pretty long time. So you can customize your dashboard to get updated with content updates. So this is updated regularly, so you can see when there's a change to the NAFSA manual. You can see your recently accessed portions of the manual, editor notes, and then also create bookmarks for yourself. And then I believe we have one more slide as well. So again, this is just an example of a portion of the NAFSA manual. Other things I wanted to mention, super useful, you can copy and paste portions of the manual. You also have the ability to email portions of the manual. I will say that the recipient does need to have advisor's manual access as well. So I find the copy and paste function to be much more useful for me. And then that also brings me to the point that I see that most of us are working in small offices. It is a relatively small annual cost in terms of what you're going to get from it, but I know that in our office and many other small offices, we just have one NAFSA advisor manual subscription for use for our entire office. So again, this is the place to start. If you have any questions, there's so much covered here. And then I believe we are going to move forward with some other resources. Hannah.
Yes, and Anna, I was just going to say those are all awesome points. Thank you so much for going through that with everyone. I would just also say, if you are in a smaller office, a couple of things you might want to consider about manual access is whether or not you can split a subscription with another office. You know, these days it's tough times as we've all been going through COVID. Enrollment may be in flux at your school. Hopefully we're all welcoming students back to campus this summer, this fall, but you know, you could certainly look at splitting one with another office. And the other thing that you could contemplate doing about the NAFSA manual is speaking with your Office of General Counsel or whoever serves as your university counsel about ensuring that you have access to this important resource, because it really can go to issues of compliance that your school may wish to consider. So just putting those out there as well.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
Oops.
Am I popping in here? I'd be happy to. So
Sure. Yeah, yeah, that'd be great if you could, Hannah.
yeah, of course. So Study in the States is a resource that I find to be actually surprisingly helpful. Of course, NAFSA's manual is the advisor's manual is going to be my go-to, but there are a lot of pages within Study in the States that are written for us as DSOs specifically, screenshots for how to maneuver within SEBP sometimes. And then sometimes there are pages that are really helpful and have really accessible language about certain things that we can share with students to help connect some dots. So I find Study in the States on specific topics to be one of the most helpful resources, actually. Was there anything else that either of you wanted to add?
I would just add that a Study in the States can be particularly helpful with respect to the STEM OPT hub. That's one that my colleagues and I refer to quite a bit. Part of the thing that's nice about the STEM OPT hub is that it has publicly available information that is good for, that breaks things up by who is the person involved in the STEM OPT process. You know, is it the school? Is it the student? Is it the employer? And what is the situation? They kind of break down some of the regulatory language fairly well and explain what each person's obligations are during the STEM period. So if you see where it says help hubs there, that's one that we have found to be particularly useful.
Yes, I know we often refer our when employers have questions for us, we often refer them to Study in the States because a lot of the language is written from the employer's perspective. So very, very useful to share, especially for your students on OPT.
That's great. Thank you, Anna. Another area of resources that you can check with respect to NAFSA are the NAFSA networks. And when we were thinking about these slides, I really had to do a bit of a deep dive into some of this information because I've been a member of some of these networks for so long, I honestly could not remember how I joined them. So it was a good exercise. And you'll note that throughout this presentation, we have a lot of links. It can be challenging to find some of this information. It took me a little bit to kind of work through this. So this is the link for the NAFSA Networks page. And I would say that you know, you can really configure this to meet your needs and decide like which communities and areas of practice and expertise you want to focus on, which groups do you want to join, how frequently do you want to get information. For myself, I have some of these things set up so that I receive a daily digest of information, and I'll be sharing some of the specific groups that I follow more closely as we get farther into this section of the presentation. I would say that it can be a lot to go through some of this on a daily basis. So a couple things that I'll say is I might read through some of these digests and whatnot while I'm sort of getting settled into my day, when I'm having my cup of coffee or when I'm having some breakfast and just starting to get myself in the mindset of working with students and scholars and department administrators for the day. But we also have people in the office who kind of really dive into these. It's sort of become not like a part of their job, but it's sort of like an informal role that they've assumed in the office. And we sort of know that if something is going to be really essential for us to focus on or pay attention to, that person is going to send out an email, or that someone is going to raise this at a team meeting that week, and we'll talk about what it is and how we might need to tackle it. So you might want to talk to people in your office and say, hey, how do you want to do this? Do you want to rotate who's monitoring these so that it's not just one person and so that everybody gets in the habit of reviewing them? Do you want to have a designated period of time each week where you go through some of this as a team together so that you're paying attention and making sure that you're staying on top of this? There are a number of ways that you can go about how you manage checking these NAFSA networks. But I would encourage you to really focus on having some kind of established way that you're going to go about this. One thing is, that when you are doing research on a problem, the question is quite simple. Have there been any posts on this topic lately? And you can go through these pages, and I'm going to share some of these with you. Like NAFSA indicates, they have very diverse communities that they have working groups on. And this is what the page looks like. If you go to the communities drop down, they have these various options. Couple of things that I will highlight for member interest groups in particular. These are some that I thought might be of particular interest to people who are attending today. These are some of the ones that I thought kind of jumped out at me, but there are a number of them. Like literally there are pages of them for you to scroll through. So if you're not familiar with what some of these groups are, I think it's a good idea to revisit some of these resources when you might just need a break from what you're looking at. Set something aside, take a look at this instead, give your mind a break from whatever issue you might be focusing on for a little bit, and turn to looking at maybe some of these new resources. And you might not know what you'll find. Sometimes some of these things can be much more useful and just interesting than you thought they might be. And sometimes they have the impact too of confirming what you already know, which is a useful thing in our field too. And I always think that that's a good thing for people as well. So they have these member interest groups. Sometimes at NAFSA conferences, you'll hear them referred to as MIGs. And then there are these professional networks as well for campus and community programming, intensive English programs. And this is where the ISTA and ISCA networks sort of live. And these are the two networks that my colleagues and I primarily focus on. This is what some of the digests look like. ISTA stands for the International Student Advising Network. This is an example of what one of the digests looks like when it's delivered to your email. You can click on all of these links, and then when you do so, it will expand and you'll get the whole chain. You'll be able to view the whole chain of exchanges, which can be quite helpful. As you can see on this one, student page, there's issues about I-20, OPT eligibility. The issues here can really run the gamut. So I would encourage you to stay on top of this network if you are advising international students. And then for the international scholar advising, there are topics that certainly involve a larger variety of immigration statuses, J's, H-1Bs, O's, TNs, sometimes issues about permanent residence for faculty members and professors, things of that nature. As you can see, the first one on this particular clip is about H-1Bs and LCAs. So I would certainly encourage you to join this network. One of the things that might be nice about this network too is that if you are an international student advisor, sometimes it's helpful to just have a sense of how some of these other statuses work, especially with H's. There are so many students who go from F1, OPT, STEM, OPT to H. You don't have to know all the ins and outs, but it's nice to at least be familiar with some of the language, I think. And you might be able to get that by following some of the discussions on this particular group. A couple friendly reminders about the discussions. This is one of those professional guidelines that is sort of a cardinal rule. Be careful about replying all. check the posting guidelines before you reply to something or before you post to it. Sometimes when it comes to these types of questions, I will respond to someone, but I will respond to them directly and not on the listserv. And it's not because I mind sharing the information, but sometimes there might be information that's a little more nuanced than I can easily write in a post that would be viewable by hundreds of people. And it might be more comfortable for me to say, hey, do you have 5 minutes? Can you pick up the phone, or do you want to talk real quick? And I can kind of fill you in on what my experiences have been, or I have a question for you on this, this, and this. Do you have time? And, sometimes there are also sensitive university policies that may be at issue that I might not necessarily want. Again, I don't mind sharing with a colleague on a one-on-one basis, but that I might not want quite so publicly available depending on what the issue is. So, before you post something, give it a little bit of thought. And like I said, if my colleagues and I have posted, we have certainly said to people, if you feel more comfortable contacting us directly with your feedback, that would be great. And I've also seen very helpful chains where people have compiled like a summary of responses and posted that summary so that everyone can kind of benefit from the research. And I really think that that's just an effective way of sharing information on these networks that's really great. So that's also something worth considering. I would also say that when you're reading these posts, it's worth taking some of the information with a grain of salt. The needs of different institutions can vary greatly. And I think one of the things that I really enjoy about our field so much is that every person here is such professional. Everyone cares about doing right by their students and their scholars, but that may look very different from one school community and one campus community to another. And, something that may work for a small community college and English language program may not work for a large research institution, and vice versa. It really depends on student numbers, the campus culture and campus political landscape. Sometimes that can factor into things, institutional structure, and the nature of the education that's being provided to students on those campuses. So I also think that it's important that, one, we reserve judgment for others, because oftentimes there are many possible right answers and correct approaches to different problems. But two, to really think about, if someone's answering you or if you're reading a response, think about why the person may be responding the way they are, and what differences might exist between their institution and yours that might influence the way they are responding to a post. I think that that's really valuable advice. And we are fortunate, I think, particularly in Region 11, to have such a wealth of knowledge and such a variety of institutions here that, we also may be more accustomed, I think, than some people in other regions at a national level to accepting some of these differences. So that's also something to kind of bear in mind as you're reading through some of these responses. And in some of these strategies may or may not work for you. While NAFSA does task leadership with monitoring these posts, it's hard to know sometimes how people are processing some of these informations, how they're processing some of this information and applying it in their own practice. So just keep some of this in mind as you're reading through these resources. I think they remain very valuable, but they certainly are not the end all be all of finding a solution. I think the idea here when you're looking at these resources is to get a sense of what different institutional approaches are and think about which ones might work for you. And that's the goal here with this particular point of research. Finally, I was not aware of this resource. This was a new one to me that Hanna shared when Anna and I were talking about this presentation. And there is a Facebook group called ISSers United, and I joined it. I post very little on Facebook, but I did join this group, and I have been following it for, I would say, the past week or so. And there are some people who post on this who are very knowledgeable NAFSA members and who have some really great background and expertise. And I think it kind of gives you a sense again of what questions are being asked. Sometimes I think people find it to be a little less of a high pressure situation than posting through some of the other outlets available. So this is something that that I think could be worth following. Sometimes I think people might find it faster to post something on here, but again, I would say the same rules apply that do to the other groups as well. So I wouldn't lose sight of those, that information about posting guidelines, contemplating who is sharing information and things of that nature. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Hanna to talk about some of the more specific resources that Region 11 and GRAC can offer.
Thanks so much, Elizabeth. I'm glad you liked that group. I also think it's really helpful. And the informality of it makes it more accessible to some degree, which is nice. Okay, so we're thinking about Region 11. Of course, before we think about Region 11, we want to situate Region 11 nationally. So sometimes we talk about national NAFSA organization as Big NAFSA. So I'll use that language here. So Big NAFSA is a nationwide organization that covers all 50 states, and there are different regional breakdowns within that. We're in Region 11. I imagine many of the folks here know that by now, the New England states, and we're a really, really wonderful region. We have a listserv that does not function through the big NAFSA listserv channels like the ISTA and ISCA that we were just looking at. Some other regions have their regional listservs also through that same format. The fact that we've kept ours in a Google group format, I think makes it feel also a little bit more accessible, which is nice. We have a really diverse group of people in our region. We have a few highly concentrated areas with a lot of different types of schools. We've also got rural areas, we've got high schools, we've got ESL, we've got it all. And we have a lot of really knowledgeable people in our region too, folks who've been doing this for a really long time. And one of the beautiful things about Region 11 and most regions is that there really is this sense that we're all in it together. So we're here for one another. And the regional team is a group of people who are working, living, being in Region 11, who have decided that they want to volunteer and contribute and give back to the community in particular ways. So there's a link here to the regional team, so you can see who's on the team. There's a number of different positions. If you want to get added to the regional listserv, for example, you'll email our communications rep. That's all outlined on the website that breaks down all of the team roles. We always have a chair stream. Christy Fry is our new leader. We're so pleased to have Christy. And then my role within the team is that of the regulatory ombuds person. So I'm here to help connect anybody who needs help connecting with information about the regulations. Susanna is another person on our team, and she's our KISS rep, which means she's the knowledge community representative for international students and scholars. So both Susanna and I represent Region 11 on big NAFSA groups that do advocacy work and do educational development work as well. So we're plugged in at that big level and then also at the really local level. And a lot of our work can overlap. It's definitely a Venn diagram. At the big NAFSA level, the way that they talk about what Susanna does versus what I do is thinking about the what versus the how. So let me see if I can explain this. This has been explained to me so many times. I feel like I'm finally starting to get it. But the what is the language of the regulations, really. What is the policy that is informing what we're dealing with here? Not necessarily the interpretation of the policy, not the institutional policy that we're generating, but what are the words that are determining sort of the space in which we are moving when we think about something particular. So if you have a question about what the regs say about XYZ topic, please feel free to reach out to me. And what I'm going to focus on is finding the sources of information and the citations, and then hopefully also cobble together a bit of resources that might help to guide you in thinking about your own interpretation. But I try not to to go too deeply into the interpretation territory unless I kind of switch from my RegBud hat to my personal PDSO hat and then tell you what I'm up to in my neck of the woods. Susanna, on the other hand, can do a little bit more of the hand holding with the interpretation aspect of what we're doing with the regs. So that's the how. How are we actually putting this all into practice? You can feel free to reach out to both of us at once. In a lot of ways, she and I are both also just reference librarians for you. You can reach out to us if you've gone into ISTA and you're trying to find the topics that you want content around. That search bar is tough. It does not work as well as a Google search bar. And Susanna and I are in there and digging around a lot, and we've potentially already responded to other emails similar to yours and pulled resources together. So feel free to lean on us to help you identify what some of those sources of information are. And also know that because we're both representing the region at these big NAFSA levels, that part of what you're doing by contacting us is, yes, getting help for you, you're getting your answers, hopefully, but then we're also getting a really good pulse on what's up, what questions are on DSO's minds, what kinds of content do we want to be bringing back to those big NAFSA conversations. If we are, inviting Department of State to a regulatory session for the annual conference, what kind of questions do we want to be asking? And so we take temperature checks in the regional listservs, in the national listservs like ISTA and ISCA. Also, you'll probably get sick of hearing us say it, but IssueNet, whenever something's coming up, whether or not you have a solution to it, putting it into the report and issue function of IssueNet, which you don't need a NAFSA membership in order to access, is pinging it for those big NAFSA teams that are then going to be going through those lists and trying to distill them into content for government workshops. So that's me and Susanna. Please lean on us. I think next slide.
When we're talking about some of these resources, one of the GRAC team members said, please emphasize that people should read the emails from their friend Hanna. Introduce your friend Hanna. So really, we were talking about how difficult it can be to stay on top of some of the things that come through the listserv. And I would say if you really need to focus on a couple of things, certainly the emails from Hanna and Susanna are great starting points and places where it's like, if you get to nothing else on a particular day or in a particular week for this kind of review, those are the emails that you would want to take a look at.
Thanks. And actually, before I dive into GRAC, there's one other sort of regional grouping that I want to highlight, not available to everyone, but some of us have really sort of like sub-regional groups of DSOs that we get together with. I find this to be incredibly helpful. So I'm situated out here in Western Massachusetts, so fortunate to be part of a 5-college consortium. Looking at you, Caitlin. Caitlin works at a school just down the street. And so the DSOs and PDSOs of those 5 schools get together once a month and we keep each other grounded. And it's incredibly helpful, especially for folks like me that are in a small office and I just need a sounding board sometimes. So if you don't already have access to that type of grouping, you might even consider creating something. There might be other folks, especially now that we're all on Zoom all the time, there might be other folks that are needing that same type of connection that would really benefit from it. It's fruitful for everybody, I think. And so GRAC is another one of these sort of like sub teams. GRAC, Region 11 is the only region in the big NAFSA world that has a GRAC. GRAC is the Government Regulations Advisory Committee, and I'm so glad it's written out on this slide because I can never remember all of those words. And it's a subcommittee that specializes in US government laws, rules, and regulations at the federal, state, and local level as they pertain to international students and scholars. So this is a team of folks similar, sort of in a shadow way to the regional NAFSA team. This is a team of volunteers who have experience in the field and want to be supporting other DSOs with educational opportunities, professional development opportunities, and where possible advocacy. So Spring Immigration Workshop, for example, this is coordinated entirely by GRAC. You will probably also hear us pinging that GRAC will be looking for new members this summer. And so we will be glad to get your applications, but you can reach out to anybody on GRAC with questions. Folks you have relationship with, folks you don't have relationship with, we're folks that are on GRAC because they want to help you. And they're there to give back and they're experts. So please don't hesitate to reach out to any of the folks that you are seeing chair sessions here. We're all really ready to connect. think we can go on to the next slide. So here's a link to learn a little bit more about GRAC, things that members can do. They're here to help you connect with contacts. They're going to be, we all host sessions like Spring Immigration Workshop. We tend to also help with the regional offerings as well. And in the past, we've been able to do some advocacy with on a more local level with agencies like the RMV, with Social Security, SEBP. That's been, I think, pretty fruitful for the region.
Thank you so much, Hannah. That's a great summary, and I apologize. My PowerPoint has been a little sticky today. So one of the final topics that we wanted to cover is about, should you contact your SEVP field rep or the SEVP response center? And the three of us are planning to weigh in on this. And admittedly, this is an area where, for myself, I have a little bit less experience in working with the field reps. My current office has our director for immigration services, and she is primarily our point person with the field reps. And for those of you who may not be familiar, the field reps are part of the Student Exchange Visitor Program. And as it is written on the SEVP and ICE websites, they are designed to serve as kind of a liaison between the Student Exchange Visitor Program and schools. And this is sort of a summary from that website about what their major roles and responsibilities are. And we thought it would be useful to talk today a little bit about some of when our institutions contact field reps directly for assistance. Each state has its own field rep. In Massachusetts, we have 2 because it is such a large state in terms of the number of schools that are there. But this website, I believe, does have a link where you can look at the name and contact information for your field rep. There are some positions that are open right now in some states as well. But, you know, I'd like to get a sense from Anna and Hannah, you know, what do you think field reps can really help you with? I know at my institution, we have requested their assistance with certain recertification issues and I-17 issues when trying to add programs, but I'd like to hear from both of you about what some of your experiences have been with that.
I can chime in on a few things and say, so we've found it useful in terms of benchmarking. So obviously your field rep is visiting multiple institutions, so they may not be able to provide you in-depth information about what or how another institution is operating. They can sort of give you a sense, you know, if you're looking to reevaluate a specific policy or just find out how other schools are addressing an issue. I know our field rep has referred us to some other schools that they visited, which has been super helpful. And then I also know, you know, coming into COVID, our field rep was super helpful in letting us know things that were coming down the pipeline. So again, they are a part of the Student Exchange Visitor Program, connected, you know, they're a part of the government. They can't give you all the information before it's released, but they are, it is useful. And usually you can get a general sense of things that may be coming, you know, in the future before there may be an official release. So I think Hannah was also going to jump in here.
Thanks. I was going to echo that I have had I've received a lot of help from my field rep around the I-17, around recertifications, various questions I've had about documentation, even just the resources that she's pointed me to have been really helpful because there's a lot out there and it can be a little bit overwhelming, especially if you're new to managing the I-17. But for me, the biggest thing that comes to mind when I think about field reps is that not all field reps are created equal. And we here in this call have field reps all over the region, and we don't all have the same field rep. And so we aren't all going to have the same experiences with our field rep. And not all of our field reps are going to have the same access to knowledge as one another. So some of our field reps have been DSOs for a very long time and actually really, really get it. And some are still wrapping their heads around some of this. So there's a little bit of nuance, I think, in figuring out, not dissimilar to when you're reading a response in the national listserv. Who's saying this? What kind of content is informing it? And is it really a question that I need answered by this individual? Is this the place where I'm going to get the expert information? So we're going to shift into considerations. I'll hold off until we dive in a little bit more.
No, I think that's great. I think, I think Hannah raises a couple really good points, and some of this goes back to the point that she just made about even having small groups of people. If you have 3 or 4 of you who are kind of from a similar institution and might have similar concerns, are there ways that you can kind of coordinate with each other and make sure that you're on the same page before issues are brought to a field rep? This doesn't have to be anything where you're having a formal weekly meeting. Maybe just do a brown bag lunch with each other over Zoom. Or if you are close by, can you grab a cup of coffee and kind of talk through some of what's going on? I think the thing that is important to bear in mind about field reps is that they have a role that is focused on regulatory enforcement. And, for many of us who are in the field as international student and scholar advisors, we came to this field to welcome an international community to our campus, to help people learn and grow, to help researchers be able to focus on research so that something like their visa status is not their primary concern while they're here and they can do the work. And these aren't things that are necessarily in opposition to one another, but if you ask a question of a field rep, you have to be careful because you may get certain answers in certain types of contexts that you don't like or that aren't feasible for your institution to implement. That's certainly one consideration I think that people need to make. And that's why I would certainly continue to encourage people to be in touch with some of these people that we have mentioned, your Region 11 team, GRAC members, other colleagues that you have in the field who are at similarly postured institutions, because these are the people I think who can kind of give you a sense of how things work on the ground. If you're not entirely familiar, what are other people actually doing? And then I think that brings up the question of, if you still have a question, getting a sense of how widespread the question is, and is there a possibility that you could be raising an issue that isn't really on the field rep's radar right now? And do we really want to ask this question right now? I think certainly, under the prior administration, I think there was a general sense throughout the field that there would be certain questions and certain types of advocacy that would not have been wise to undertake under the Trump administration with their general outlook towards immigration. Not to be overly political about it, but now things feel very different. We have an administration that's talking about the importance of STEM and things like that. It's just a very, very different world, I think, and some of those considerations I think are important to keep in mind as well. And I'd like for Anna and Hannah to weigh in on some of the considerations and experiences that they've had with respect to field reps as well, if you guys have some other insights here.
I think building off of what you were just saying, Elizabeth, sometimes when we are dealing with grayness in our understanding of the what, right, of the regulation or the policy, sometimes grayness is really uncomfortable, and sometimes we can embrace the gray. And so when we ask questions about the gray area, we have to be prepared for answers that may or may not actually be the ones that we want. And sometimes there is enough room to move within the gray to feel really comfortable and still have a more favorable process. So before you ask a question, I think it's a good idea to ask yourself, what will it look like if the answer isn't the one that I want? And am I then locked into it? And then are we all locked into it? That's something that I think about sometimes.
Absolutely. Yeah, I like your approach there too, Hannah, about embracing the gray. Sometimes it's not about whether, sometimes, the regulations or the SEVP policy that is spelled out might not affirmatively say, and I think more often than not, it doesn't say, sure, you can go ahead and do this, but it doesn't say you can't all the time either. And sometimes that can bring up other questions for an institution, but sometimes the lack of an explicit prohibition on certain things is something that may be embraceable, Last couple points that I'll raise here. Anna, did you have anything that you wanted to add, or?
I was just going to echo what both of you already said. I think given also the extent of the other resources that we have available to us, say generally, at least from my opinion, that the SEVP rep is definitely not the place to start, just given the fact that there are so many other resources available. And again, DSOs in our region who have had similar issues. So I'd say if you're reaching out to an SEVP rep, you should probably have a discussion with your office and have a very clear reason why that is your point of contact for that question.
Absolutely. And I think, again, I think what the point of this conversation too is just to remind everybody that, even though we haven't been able to gather together in person, we are still here for each other. And there are many ways that we can be in touch with each other for advising support. Last thing that we wanted to mention here is the SEBP Response Center. Just very quickly, they are most helpful for technical issues with SEBIS. Do you need to reactivate a record? Did you make a mistake in transfer? Like, is there an issue with the transfer? We would never recommend that anybody, at least me and my colleagues, would never recommend that anyone contact the response center for any kind of case-specific advising. These are people who, my understanding, are for the most part government contractors. When they're reading to you, when they're talking to you on the phone, they're reading from a very specific script. They just do not have, as a general rule, at the first tier level anyway, the professional background that DSOs, people who are serving on NAFSA groups have. And, if something needs to be dealt with through the response center, you would get that guidance from one of these other resources that we have talked about today. So just wanted to kind of hit back on that as well.
Can I add one thing to that too, Elizabeth?
Sure.
Even when you are dealing with technical issues with SEVIS, again, knowing that the SRC folks come from various levels of knowledge and familiarity with the content, sometimes you might get a really funky answer. and I just want to encourage folks to sort of stand in their truth. If they are getting what feels like a funky answer, maybe check in with some colleagues, get a sense for if it really adds up or not. And you might need to push back. I think we're seeing that increasingly in some cases. And I will also say I've had some really amazing people on the phone when I call SRC. It's hit or miss. And it can be really hit too. Really, really wonderful people, and they're all working incredibly hard. But every once in a while, wires get crossed, and maybe they misunderstood the ask, and maybe they misunderstood or misstated something that they were sharing with you. So if you're getting a response that just doesn't add up, you might want to do a little bit more digging, and you might want to push back.
I think that's a great point. And I just want to thank, we've had some great comments in the chat. I just want to thank some of our colleagues who have been adding some input there, and thank Emma Swift. She mentions SEVP reps can be very helpful if you need them to confirm a no for something. And that's a great point, is that, if something is really abundantly clear, if something is really established and you have SEVP guidance, but maybe it's not regulatory and you need them to confirm widespread practice, that is also a really good point, that sometimes, you can say to campus stakeholders who might be fighting you on something, hey, I checked with our rep, I was able to get someone on the phone and I was able to confirm this. I think that's a really good point. And again, if there's any question about whether something is that concrete, though, do double check with your colleagues here before you move forward with that inquiry. But I think that's a really good technique to be mindful of. And then just some final steps before making final decisions. You're not alone in this at your institution either. I think it's important that before you establish policy, that some of the people that we have listed here be consulted if necessary. Again, everyone's university or college or school is structured very differently. So some of these offices may function in different capacities where you are. One thing that we did want to give mention to here as well is that sometimes if something really is going sideways, that you may wish to consider congressional intervention. If you have a government or community affairs or a federal relations office, you may wish to involve them. And again, that's another instance where, to Hannah's point and Anna's points earlier, having contacts in your local community, in your state, can be helpful as well, because they may be able to point you to someone specific in those offices who can help you navigate those resources more quickly and effectively. Last couple steps that we can touch on here, and again, I'd love it if Anna and Hannah can weigh in on this as well. Staying informed and updated. Make sure that you're using the most updated reference guides. The manual makes this so easy. You know, if you go to the manual main page and just scroll down, they have these updates that are done in, they're displayed in order from most recent and then going backwards. So they're really convenient and really useful to be able to scroll through. And you can just kind of take a look at what's there. You know, it takes no time to do that when you're at the manual landing page. And then these are a couple of other tactics that we would recommend for staying informed and updated. Couple things that we didn't quite mention and because we were focused so much on NAFSA and regional resources, but there are law firm emails that you can register for as well. These are links to registration pages for a few firms. These are not endorsements of any of these firms. These are just firms that you know, happen to be pretty well known and happen to have very regular publications out there. Clasco, for example, has even free seminars sometimes. They just have one about STEM OPT and entrepreneurs in startup positions. Things like that can be really helpful and can give you insights that you might not otherwise have access to. So we have a little bit of time left, not much, but if anybody has any particular questions, I'd love to take those from the chat box. And if people need to stick around for a few more minutes, I'm happy to stick around for a little bit. If I understand, if Anna and Hannah, if you guys have other stuff to do, I don't mind sticking around. Well, it seems like that kind of wraps it up. I'm not seeing anything else in the chat. As we mentioned, SIW is hosted by Grack, and Grack is a Region 11 subcommittee that focuses on regulatory matters, and we will have a call for new members coming out this June. So if you have the interest in being able to join, then we'd love to hear from you. I see we do have one person raising their hand, Yosaba.
Sorry, I was having issues with my
Sure.
mute button.
No problem.
You mentioned that study in the States is useful for employers for OPTs. I work with J1 students. Is there something similar for academic training?
I have very few J students myself. I would certainly start, I think, with the Exchange Visitor Program page to see if they have anything there. That would be my recommendation. I would check the NAFSA manual to see if they point to any particular AT resources on that.
Okay, thank you.
I'll just link to the Bridge USA page in the chat, which I think could be a good place to dig around.
Oh, great. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for posting that, Hannah. Okay, with that, I think we'll wrap up. Thank you again to everybody for joining us today. We really appreciate that. And hope to see you at more SIW sessions in the coming days. Thanks, everyone.